but we might get cracking anyway, Stuart, because
yeah, sure.
I'll give you the right amount of time. So we might start the seminar. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Bidjigal people's land of where I'm speaking from today. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living, learning and working from today in this virtual meeting. So I'd like to warmly welcome Professor Stuart Barr to our City Futures seminar series. So big welcome, Stuart. So Stuart's got a presentation today on digital twins of cities. Stuart, for those who don't know, moved across from the UK pretty much 12 months ago, roughly.
Yeah.
And has taken over as Professor of Urban Analytics at University of Melbourne and the Director of the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, Auran. And so Stuart's got 20 years plus experience in urban data science, brings a wealth of experience working at University of Newcastle, where he was the Director of the Spatial Analytics and Modelling Lab. He's been involved in many big multidisciplinary projects, and great opportunity for us in Australia to tap into his expertise now that he's here in the land of Oz, particularly, and I think Stuart's going to talk about some of the opportunities working in with some of the UK infrastructure and the lessons learnt there, and how we might transfer some of that capability and build off the shoulders of what's happened in the UK around areas like the UK Data Analytics Facility for National Infrastructure, Daphne. So over to you, Stuart.
Great, thanks, Chris. It was all going so well until I suddenly seemed to have lost the actual presentation and can't see that any longer on the screen. So first things first, I'll try and have a look at trying to retrieve that somehow. Oh, that's the wrong one. So this is really going well. Let's start.
It's Friday afternoon. You always get these technical glitches on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock because they're sort of interfering. We're on the cusp of that Friday afternoon drink session, so it creates some extra glitches in our Teams environment here.
Right.
If you do get stuck, you can send something to Bala or myself, and we can try and put that up for you.
Well, we'll give this a whirl. It seems to be uploading again, so hopefully we'll get somewhere in a few minutes or less. I'm just conscious of time. Just while I'm waiting for the presentation to reload, then just many thanks to Chris for his kind words of welcome. As he pointed out, I'm the relatively new director of the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, Auran. I'm not actually going to speak today particularly about Auran or any activities that we are undertaking, but please do feel free to contact myself or the outreach team at Auran if you want to find out more about the work we're doing and some of the new research support that we'll be providing into the future for the research community. So the presentation's back up. Hopefully everybody can see that. Good. Couple of confirmation noddings of heads, so that's always encouraging. So what I want to really talk about today is to give you a overview of some of the work which I've been involved in the UK around urban digital twins within Newcastle University, but also very collaboratively with other research groups around the UK. So work I'm going to present today is the result of not only that undertaken within Newcastle University, but also within the Centre for Data Analytics at the University of Leeds, that's led by Mark Birkin, and also collaboration with the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at UCL, which was originally headed up by Mike Batty, and also work which we've been undertaking with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK Centre for National Data Science, who have an urban digital twin and urban analytics programme that a lot of the work we present today will be showing. I'm going to try and keep this pretty light touch. I won't be diving into a huge amount of detail, but I'm happy to follow up on some of the more technical aspects and the nitty-gritty of some of the work I'll show. And if I can't answer those questions directly myself, very happy to connect people with colleagues back in the UK who are actually sort of, if you like, doing the coalface work on some of the methods and techniques that you're going to see today. I think starting point is that the term urban digital twin, or the digital twin of cities, has now become a ubiquitous term that we use in reference to being able to the digitization process of the built environment currently. And we are all probably aware that there's a whole host of initiatives that are taking place around this process of trying to create a digital representation of the physical fabric, and in some cases also the social fabric of our built environments that we live in and occupy. And so we've even seen in the last year, for example, the OGC, the Open Geospatial Commission, hold their first ever Urban Digital Twin Summit. That was back in January of this year. And I know that CC Slatanova from the Grid Group was heavily involved in that. I was lucky enough to be involved in chairing a couple of sessions at it. And it's really quite an international coming together of thinking around how we develop and build these digital models that are trying to capture the inherent physical characteristics of our cities into the future and current day as well. And we have a whole host of examples of now what we commonly refer to as being digital twins. So, for example, probably one of the best known is the Singapore digital twin, where the city is in a really quite extensive level of digitization representation within its 3D city model. There's real-time data feeds and streams available, and frequently analytics and modeling used in order to try and actually plan both in real time and also strategically the activities that are taking place within Singapore. And one of the things which has been very personally encouraging, and I think is more broadly immensely encouraging, is that actually in Australia, there are many examples of what I would consider to be world-leading examples of emergent digital twins of the built environment being developed. So we have, for example, in Melbourne, the digital twin that's being developed and built around Fisherman's Bend. In Queensland, we have the Brisbane digital twin that's being developed. And then also we have in New South Wales, the New South Wales digital twin, which is really quite an advanced example of how we can take 3D city models, the complex geometry of the built environment, integrate that into a real-time system, and start to combine and integrate real-time data and IoT in terms of understanding the dynamics and interactions that are taking place within the built environment. So I think Australia actually is immensely well positioned to take advantage of this emergent growth of the digitization of the built environment, which is encapsulated within this term of a digital twin of the city or a digital twin of the built environment. And we know that there's a whole host of initiatives which are driving forward this uptake of the building development of digital twins. So back in the UK, I was very fortunate to be involved as one of the academics in helping to draft and develop the Gemini principles, which you can see on the left here, which basically articulate what the key components, at least conceptually, would be of the digital twin of the built environment, with a very strong focus on infrastructure, so physical infrastructure and critical infrastructure, but the concepts that are covered within the Gemini principles are also valid for other aspects of the built environment. And also then in Australia, more recently, there's been a publication of the concepts or conceptually what a spatially enabled digital twin would look like for Australia. And that's being used as the underpinning principles in much of the work that we've been seeing in Melbourne, Brisbane, Queensland, New South Wales, in terms of the development of this digital twin technology. I guess for me, some of the interesting observations I have at this point in time with regards to our journey on developing digital twins of cities is that we have done an immensely good job on building the foundational capability that's needed around that bottom layer of the pyramid you can see here within the Gemini's principles, around beginning to be able to capture and represent the really quite heterogeneous forms of data that we need to have available to us in order to really develop and build a genuine digitization or digital version of the physical urban fabric that we're interested in analysing. I think where we still have some major challenges that we need to address, though, is on the sort of sense-making aspects of the pyramid, where we, I think, still have some more significant steps to make to bringing in analytics, simulation modelling, in order to actually then leverage off that data in order to provide the feedback into the real urban environment in terms of improved situational awareness or improved policy planning and practice over the longer term. And so we made a great start, but we're still very much on this journey towards being able to deliver what I would genuinely call an operational digital twin for the built environment. And then in relation to that observation, I think there's enormous opportunities in the future around the decision-making aspect of the Gemini's pyramid. So the types of methods that we use for decision support, the new visualization tools that we're going to need, and some of the ways that we can think about optimization and options around decision making and planning into the future. So what I want to try and do today is actually just give some pointers, as I said, in work that I've been involved in back in the UK, not so much focusing on the bottom part of the pyramid, but more focusing around how we're starting to develop some of the analytics and simulation modeling tools that would actually fit into a digital twin of the built environment, and allude a little bit to how some of the work we've started around decision support and visualization engines and approaches for digital twins. Just sticking with the Gemini's principles briefly for a moment, I think one of the things which I'm always trying to raise is that the Gemini's principles basically articulate two types of digital twin for the built environment. The first of which is the dynamic real-time digital twin, the one that I think we're probably most commonly aware of at the moment, and the one that we're seeing the greatest development taking place within pilots and digital twins such as Fisherman's Bend and the New South Wales digital twin. But it's also important to realise that we also have this, what we call the strategic planning digital twin, where we're using modelling and simulation with new updated data on the condition of the built environment, maybe actually provided to us by actually the real-time digital twins, which are capturing those dynamics and condition-based data, in order to simulate and model what the future planning options and investment portfolios might look like for the built environment. And so it's, for me, at least personally, important to make sure that we focus effort and development of digital twins of the built environment across these two types into the future, and not just exclusively focus on one or other of them. It's actually by developing both of these capabilities will maximise the utility of the methods and techniques that are available. And there are quite a large number of organisations, even outside universities and academia, that are now really seriously thinking around this complete digitisation or utilisation of digital twin technology within their businesses. So I'm still reluctant, even though I'm on a different continent now, to actually state explicitly which infrastructure utility company this is in the UK. But this is a schematic that has been developed by a utility company that I've done some work with previously, where they're starting to think how a digital twin may actually develop and be deployed within their business model. So again, we have this kind of data layer or foundation, the ability within the analytics to have coupled and nested digital twins. So the idea of a high degree of modularity of different tools and models that can be coupled and linked together. And then the ability for different versions of those digital twins to be spun out, essentially multiple versions with different parameterizations, looking at different scenarios, to be actually spun out in order to look at the different options around investment or planning or interventions that actually could be undertaken in terms of the actual real infrastructure on the ground that they own and have to manage on a day-to-day basis. So there's a really kind of emergent interest in digital twins of the built environment and infrastructure, not just as an academic exercise, but also genuinely in terms of industry and new approaches to managing businesses into the future. Although I said I wasn't going to touch on data, I think it is worth at least briefly highlighting the importance that that data foundation to the Gemini principles plays within our ability to build digital twins of the city and urban areas, and some of the challenges that I still think are current, but which we're beginning to tackle much more robustly and in a sustainable manner moving forward now. So in particular, that if we are going to really build holistic digital twins of cities, we need to be able to handle the vast amounts of different types of data, so the high variety of data types and forms of data that we have about the built environment, not just being able to handle our traditional topographic data sets, but also the 3D city models that we've seen before, and how do we bring BIM, the industrial foundation classes, integrate those in some sensible way with our existing city models that we have, invariably represented or at least stored within City GML? How do we then integrate our infrastructure, understanding of infrastructure, so electricity, gas, water supply, for example, and how do we understand and represent the topology and the connectivity of that to the building stock and the building assets? What forms and ways do we build the real-time data feeds that we need, both in terms of measuring the environmental conditions of the built environment, but also more broadly now the wider ubiquitous use of IoT and edge computing within the built environment, and new forms of potentially very useful data such as CCTV data, traffic video, where we're having to handle essentially image-based and video-based data formats within our data management systems. And so what we're beginning to see is the emergence of a new way towards data management of the built environment, where our traditional model of trying to force everything into often a relational database management framework is starting to lose, if not necessarily credibility, but people are looking at alternatives and starting to look at trying to utilize database management systems which are more appropriate for the particular types of data that need to be represented. So in the case of the spatial data sets, that may be using a spatially enabled database such as PostGIS. In the case of image data, using array-based databases such as SciDB or Rasterman. In the case of network data sets, using graph databases such as Neo4j to represent that topology and connectivity of the networks. And one piece of work which I've been involved in back in the UK has been looking around how do we start to build those hybrid database architectures that allow us to bring those different core database management systems together, representing different types of data into what would look, at least for a user, to be a single logical database that we need for the built environment. So in some of the work that we've been doing in a very large infrastructure project called the Infrastructure Transitions Research Consortium back in the UK, we've built what was called NISMOD DB++. That stands for the National Infrastructure Modeling Database. And the plus is that we originally built this as a relational database management system, and then realized that we were getting really appalling performance and retrieval from it for certain types of data, and then went to this more hybrid database architecture that is encapsulated within this schematic you can see here. So in NISMOD DB++, we're using our standard relational database management system where appropriate, but also utilizing array-based databases for image data and gridded data of hazards, so intense rainfall fields, for example, flood inundation, footprints, so on and so forth, using graph databases to represent infrastructure networks such as electricity, gas and water supply, wastewater and sewer networks, and then building a set of reporting databases within this framework that are actually able to store and structure the results of any modeling and simulation that's done within this particular environment. And what we found is that by building this hybrid architecture and allowing and building essentially the linkages between the databases, so in this case what you can see is a set of buildings and a set of characteristics about those buildings. So for example, the building form type, whether it's residential, non-residential, whether it's a detached, semi-detached, terrace, flat accommodation, the number of estimated residents for each of those buildings, and then also what type of building, as I said, it is, whether it's residential or non-residential. What we've done is we're able to link those buildings with the infrastructure networks that are providing services to them. So in this case, this is the electricity feeder network, and linking that back to the substations that are actually providing the electricity onto those electricity feeder networks. And so we can start to do some really quite elaborate analysis in relation to those topological links and connectivities within this hybrid database. And when I mean elaborate, what we're looking to try and do is undertake analysis at scale. So here, this is actually a graph colouring of the entire electricity feeder network for London. So this is the connectivity between 17,000 substations and 3.6 million buildings in London. And what we were doing here was we were looking at what performance gains we got with regards to query retrieval of where we randomly seeded a range of failures onto the network and then had to go and search for the substations that were linked to those failures and then work out exactly how many buildings would be impacted by each of the failures in terms of their broken connectivity to the substation. And the relatively simple plot you can see here shows the speed increase you get compared to trying to do this with Postgres and doing this through basically a whole host of relational joins in order to try and do that query, compared to PG routing, which is a specific network routing algorithm that's been written for Postgres, and you get quite a significant speed up by using PG routing. But in fact, if you use the graph database and the hybrid architecture, you get in fact a 3 times improvement over that type of query by using this hybrid architecture. So just an example of how, by being a bit more flexible in terms of our database management, we get real performance gains at scale at this type of problem. So that's a little bit around some of the data management considerations. What I'd like to look at now, or just give you some examples of some of the work that we've been doing on the 2 types of digital twins I alluded to. I'm going to step through these very quickly because I'm just conscious of time. So the first type we're going to look at are real-time digital twins, and in fact, work that we were doing at Newcastle around trying to have real-time situational awareness and improved what we call nowcasting, forecasting into the near future around how extreme events may impact on the city of Newcastle when they occur, before they actually occur. So what we have here is the idea of taking a series of observations in real time, using modeling and analytics to try and do that nowcasting component of trying to understand how the system's going to be behaving in the near future. So we're looking at that kind of 30 to 90 minute window into the future, synthesizing and understanding what the system or how this urban area will respond to those impacts, and then using that to improve and undertake another series of observations so that we can continuously do this observe model synthesis iteration using real-time data feeds. And what we want to do is do this across the environmental hazard that we're interested in. So it might be extreme rainfall events, on the impacts of those rainfall events, so it might be surface water flooding, and then how we can be adaptive or mitigate for those impacts before the events actually occur and hit a particular location within our built environment. So the work that we've been doing in relation to this, or one particular project, is called Flood Prepared. And this is basically a system that we built at Newcastle where we're taking real-time data from colleagues who have developed what's called the Urban Observatory at Newcastle, and trying to use that to predict where we're going to see high intensity rainfall that's going to lead to extreme surface water flooding of the type you can see in this video, and then try and develop a system which informs pedestrians and people using the traffic network, the road network, that there is a potential hazard likely to occur in the future at particular locations. So this is a project that was sponsored by the Natural Environmental Research Council in the UK. And just to try and give you an idea of its size, there was about half a dozen postdoctoral researchers working on this. It was a joint project between the Spatial Analytics and Modelling Lab at Newcastle, but also the Department of Mathematics and Statistics, the Department of Engineering, Computer Science, and also Geography. So very much a real multidisciplinary team that was brought together to tackle this problem. And so what we're doing in Flood Prepared is we're monitoring the actual hazard, so that is the rainfall field as it's developing. We are then taking that monitoring of the rainfall and actually modelling how rainfall will have developed into the future across the city, using that to parameterize a hydrodynamic surface flooding model to try and understand or get locations of where we're going to see surface water flood inundation, then using that to tell us where we need to focus further monitoring in order to be able to monitor potential congestion development, and then using that to then do second order spatial models of how we expect congestion and disruption to propagate and flow over the road network to different parts of Newcastle. So just very quickly, some examples of the data that we're using in this project and some of the tools and models that we've developed. So as I said, we leverage off being very fortunate that at Newcastle there's a urban observatory that's been set up. This contains in excess of 70 now weather stations across Newcastle that continuously measuring rainfall, but also temperature and humidity and solar irradiance. Their data is provided to their server virtually in real time, and they have an API that you can then, with 1 or 2 minutes of the data being received by that server, you can actually download the data of the current most recent data feeds for your own purposes. The other thing that has been a real game changer for Newcastle and many other cities in the UK is in the investment of short-range weather radar. These are weather radar that can actually analytically calculate estimated rainfall intensity. In this particular case, the one that we have at Newcastle has a 30-kilometre radius at a resolution of every 3 minutes temporally, and at a 100-metre spatial resolution. So we can actually use this to dynamically monitor how convective rainstorm events are starting to propagate and move towards Newcastle essentially every 3 minutes while we're undertaking our modelling and simulation. And what we do is we use this weather radar data essentially to parameterize an advanced statistical spatial temporal rainfall model that basically tries to nowcast into the future what we expect the rainfall intensity to be over Newcastle. This model is updated in real time. So as new weather radar data feeds come in, they're using advanced data simulation approaches to bring that new data into the model to remove or reduce the uncertainty in the prediction at each iteration. So this is basically showing how data simulation that we more normally see in weather forecasting can actually be utilised within this type of environmental digital twin type of analysis. We then take the rainfall model outputs and we use those to parameterize a GPU accelerated surface flooding model. This can work nearly at the same temporal resolution as the radar data, not quite. We can run this at 5-minute intervals currently. But what this gives us is the temporal evolution of what we expect to be future surface water flooding and inundation across Newcastle, which you can see here. So where you, in the top left, that's at T0, the middle one is at 5 minutes later, and the bottom one is at 10 minutes after a particular rainfall event has been simulated within this nowcasting framework. And then we take the outputs of the surface water flooding model, and then we try to use that to work out how the road network is going to be impacted. So which roads will be closed as a result of the surface water inundation, and in fact also how the free flow traffic speed will change even across those roads which are experiencing surface water flooding, but which are still passable but at a lower speed. And so the idea is that, again, we'll continuously try to update how these estimated free flow traffic speeds will change as a function of the impact of the rainfall event. And then we try and use that to introduce our monitoring of different locations across Newcastle, feeding off the CCTV data, using deep learning and TensorFlow software to then actually try and calculate and estimate the magnitude of disruption currently. And then we use that to then estimate what we might expect disruption to be into the future as a result if the rainfall event actually does hit a particular location. So this, again, just an example of this observe, model, synthesize, and then trying to feed that back into a continuous loop of monitoring and modeling. We have managed for Newcastle to actually take this concept and build a prototype demonstrator which we will be deploying, and actually we need to deploy for Newcastle City Council for 2 years after the end of the project. We've managed to develop our first pass workflow, which is actually managed to couple all these models and the data feeds together into a prototype system. So this is a schematic here that kind of shows you, if you like, the workflow and the connectivity between the models, and a little bit of the underpinning big data tools that we're using to achieve this. So looking at things like Kafka, which is a data broker piece of software, using Argo to do our orchestration of the workflows, and looking at different ways of how we can manage the real-time data within this type of approach. And as I said, we're also looking and considering different methods and techniques for visualizing these sorts of real-time digital twins. So as part of the pilot project that I just showed you, the workflow that we've developed, we developed a very simple leaflet-based visualization, which takes the outputs from the modeling and simulation in real time and actually places it into this visualization you can see on the left that shows how the flood inundation extents are developing, and then looking at the CCTV data of particular locations. On the right, we've been working on how we can couple in real time for the modeling, the visualization of the evolution of the dynamic models. So here we've taken a relatively simple agent-based model where we can introduce a disruption onto the road network, the red dots you can see. And what we're seeing here is in visualization time, how the model is recalculating the distribution and flows of vehicle movements over the road network in order to avoid those disruption points. So really hopefully useful tools that we'll be able to develop and start to operationalize into the future that allow us to have these new lenses and understanding of the dynamics of these real-time data and nowcasting types of frameworks. I just, again, just with being conscious of time, I'll just briefly touch on some of the work that we've been doing on strategic digital twins, or this second type of digital twin, where we're looking at more of taking existing current condition data around the built environment and then using that within a strategic planning framework going forward. And this is a bit of work that we have been doing with Leeds University, so as I said, the Institute for Data Analytics, also with the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, for the Infrastructure Commission in the UK, which is looking at trying to model and understand the future infrastructure planning requirements for the United Kingdom. And what the Infrastructure Commission have asked us to do is to do a pilot piece of work that looks at understanding the future infrastructure that's required for what's called the Cambridge-Oxford Arc. This is an area north of London, between Cambridge and Oxford, where it has been proposed that there'll be potentially up to 1 million new houses developed and built over the next 10 years or so in order to try and remove population pressure from London into this area, which is seen to be highly economically productive within the UK. So some of the questions the Infrastructure Commission are interested in answering are, can that type of development be accommodated? If it can be accommodated, what would actually the urban form, the urban development actually look like? And if it was accommodated and developed under different types of future potential plans, what would be the infrastructure requirement and investment cost involved in undertaking that? So what we've been looking at here is a kind of multi-scale approach where we take the outputs from a national scale demographic model. This is essentially a spatial interaction model that's been developed by Leeds University, which gives us predictions of future population for this area. We then use that to parameterize a housing development model that we've called UDM, that's been developed and is still in continuous development at Newcastle University. We then use that to simulate for those urban development areas what the potential urban form and construction and layout might look like under the certain parameters delivered and produced from the urban development model. And then we use that to try and calculate what the infrastructure requirements or modifications would be for those new urban areas. And this type of work has been ongoing for actually quite a while. So we've been doing this type of multi-scale approach to look at climate impacts on cities. So this is some work which was undertaken by the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change, where we've been using outputs from regional scale economic models into land use transport models. So this is work that we did with CASA, the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis. So using one of their land use transport models, which then was used to parameterize our urban development model. And then we look at the impact of different future climate scenarios in relation to flooding, tidal inundation and storm surges, heat waves and droughts across London. So with this kind of multi-scale or hierarchical type of modelling and simulation for strategic planning has quite a rich history in the UK, particularly in relation to looking at climate impacts. And so the sort of outputs that we can get, or we can things we can investigate, are, for example, adaptations to the built environment. So what we're looking at here is one run of the urban development model for London, where we were asked to look at a 1 in 100 storm surge event up the River Thames, understand which areas would be inundated and which future new urban development might be impacted by that inundation, and then asked to solve the problem of saying, if you didn't develop in these locations, which were being developed under one scenario of the modelling, where would we move the development to into the future? We've also, as I said, been looking at work around developing these tools so that we can simulate entirely new urban forms and development. So this is part of the work that we've done for the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. One of the scenarios that the Infrastructure Commission are looking at is essentially building more or less 4 or 5 entire new cities of a roughly approximating between 300 and 400 inhabitants each. And what they want to know is, where would they go? What would those potential new cities look like in terms of their urban density and their urban form? And then what does that mean with regards to the infrastructure requirements and the potential vulnerability of these new urban areas to climate impacts? So in this particular case, what we were asked to do was to basically simulate a new city of 400,000 inhabitants, which is what you can see on the left. The kind of hatching you can see essentially represents different densities and mixes of types of residential and commercial and mixed land use within this synthetic simulated new city. The right-hand side is a kind of dive into the synthetic urban forms that are generated by this simulator. And then what we were asked to do was to look at the infrastructure investments that would be needed to reduce the risk of surface water flooding. So essentially, what urban drainage would be required to reduce the impacts of a 1 in 100 year event. So the top little image you can see of the urban form is the standard urban drainage. The dots are essentially the standard urban drainage into the sewer network that you get from the current design specs. The bottom one is where it's the doubling of that. And then if you run, again, a urban surface water flood model over the top of that for your 1 in 100 year rainfall event, then the left-hand side essentially is the flooding that you would see and the depth of it across the entire city. And the right-hand side just shows, again, zoomed in, adaptation that you would get if you invested more heavily in doubling the amount of surface water drainage manhole covers, as opposed to just going with the traditional standard design spec for urban drainage for urban areas. So just trying to highlight here the real power of this potential hierarchical strategic planning piece, where we're starting to couple urban modelling with infrastructure modelling with the modelling of extreme events in order to understand impacts, adaptations and potential mitigations into the future. I'm going to just skip over the last few overheads because I'm conscious about time. All I was going to say in those overheads was that one of the things which we are looking at now is the fact that many of these problems that we face within cities are very much multi-dimensional or multi-objective problems, that we're not only interested in understanding how we can be more adaptive to future impacts of surface water flooding, for example, but we want to understand how we can adapt to future heat, issues around investment in housing and building stock, future investments in infrastructure, improve public transport, so on and so forth. And so what we really need to start to do is take this type of modelling and then recast it into a multi-objective type of framework so that we can tackle these really significant urban problems from a kind of multi-dimensional, multi-objective perspective going forward. So we're only really, again, at the foothills of how this type of modelling really needs to be developed in order to have a comprehensive system of systems-based approach to urban modelling and simulation going forward. However, I think we are at a really exciting time, not just in the UK, I think also in Australia, but I think also globally, that there's a real recognition now that both these real-time digital twins and also the strategic planning type of digital twin have real potential to fundamentally change how we manage and plan and invest in our cities into the future. And back in the UK, we have a national initiative called Daphne. This is the Data Analytics Facility for National Infrastructure, which is essentially developing this modelling capability for the UK in terms of modelling both in real-time digital twins and these strategic planning digital twins, and also developing a new community of both academic and also infrastructure data digital engineers going forward. And I think one of the things which I find immensely encouraging is just the sheer quality and the sheer number of really bright young researchers who are engaging with this type of work, really infused by it, and don't see any challenge that you throw at them as being too big to tackle. And it's been one of my big privileges to be able to kind of work with you know, a really dynamic young research group who've been able to tackle these sorts of problems, such as that in flood prepared, such as the work that we've been doing for the Infrastructure Commission in the UK, and come up with some of these really quite outstanding and innovative solutions with regards to digital twins of cities. So I'll leave it there. I just want to, again, just finally emphasise, though, that what you saw today was a bit of a whirlwind tour, but was the work of the many rather than just the one person, myself. It's just I'm the conduit to hopefully letting you see some of the exciting work that's been going on back in the UK. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. That was an excellent presentation there, summing up some of the key initiatives in Australia and then looking at the work in the UK. I like how you've broken it into operational digital twin and strategic digital twin. And I think at the moment, the strategic digital twin is something that in Australia is an opportunity for us to look at what you've been doing with your research teams in the UK and how we might look at responding to extreme events, and there's no shortage of those at the moment, and unfortunately likely in the future too, which is something we need to seriously consider. I'll open it up for questions. So conscious we haven't got much time, but we've had almost 40 people on the line. If there's any questions from the audience, I'll take the first hands that I see. So raise your hands if you've got a question for Stuart Barr. No questions. If there's no questions, I'll shoot in a question or two. Oh, Bala, question. You might be on mute, Bala.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Stuart. That was really interesting. Like very exciting field of research as well. So, my question is regarding like particularly regarding the challenges. Like, so what do you think are the key challenges, like which we should be working on, as in technical challenges? I mean, like, so what are the technical challenges which are like at the moment which we should be looking at the next 5 years?
Okay, sure. So I think there's a couple. I think there's a really mature. I'll refer to Australia, but I think this is generally true globally. I think there's a very mature modelling and analytics community around the built environment, and particularly more around the sort of, if you like, the strategic planning, modelling and simulation of cities. I think the technical challenges are the ones around how do we build and develop a really genuinely operational ecosystem that allows us to bring together those individual thematically focused or domain focused models and tools into this ability to tackle the modeling at scale and in a system of systems based approach. And it's a really challenging architectural problem around the sort of underpinning infrastructure that will be able to support that going forward. I don't think you'd be surprised that this is something which we are looking at in Oran. It is something which I believe Oran should be helping and supporting and developing going forward, and that the more we can see research software and tools and the models and the analytics as a national infrastructure, in addition to data, through a project like Oran, then hopefully the more we'll be able to move towards that truly interoperable system of systems based approach. I think the couple of other technical challenges for me, I think we'll solve that, bringing and developing the ecosystem. I think what I'm less clear about at the moment are how well we'll develop the tools that then allow that translation of it back into the actual physical fabric of the built environment. So what are the key decision support tools and methods, visualization engines, the way that we look at optimization versus options analysis for decision makers and planners. The outputs that we generate from this type of modeling are inherently complex, they're inherently multidimensional, and they're not easy to understand. And we need to think around how do we build those lenses and that synthesis into these result sets in a way that allows decision makers and planners to leverage off them for maximum utility. And I think there's a real whole area of research and innovation needed within decision support and visualization going forward.
Thanks, Stuart. One last question. Conscious of time. Bill, would you like to go?
Yeah, hi Stuart. Yeah, really interesting stuff. I'm very pleased to see. Sorry I was a bit late coming in, but nevertheless I did see a lot of what you were doing. Sort of leading on from what you said there, I mean, I'd like you to reflect on, you've been in Australia now for a year and a half. what amazes me is you get the stuff you were doing in the UK and colleagues in the UK. There are numbers of centres working on this sort of high-level, sophisticated modelling, spatial modelling, and it's funded. And you appear to have strategic planning authorities engaged with the process, which may or may not, I don't know where the funding comes from, but if it's the Research Council grants, but nevertheless, you're doing real work with real people. Could you reflect on what you think the capacity of, let's face it, it's planning authorities, it's governments here to engage with this sort of thing? My experience has been they either don't particularly understand it or want to know about it, because strategic decisions here don't appear to be made on sophisticated, informed, objective criteria, if I can put it as like that. Have you got any view as to whether that could change or will change, or I've got a particularly jaundiced view of work here? Because I think this is terrific stuff, and I think there is a lot of validity here, and we've got the technology now, we've got the techniques which are driving this forward, which 5, 10 years ago we didn't have. I just wonder whether government is sophisticated or interested enough to support this national ecosystem that you talk about.
It's a really good question. I think from what I'm learning, it is going to be a big challenge in terms of I don't think for the academics to move towards thinking how do we drive forward the translation of the research outputs and outcomes from this type of work to wanting to engage with policy and planners and decision making. I think there is a reluctance to some degree. What I think where there are glimmers of hope though are that at the sort of national level, there are initiatives which we are seeing being funded which aren't directly coming from ARC. So, for example, we have the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment funding the new big Sustainable Communities Hub, which is looking at how sustainable cities, urban areas are into the future. I'm hopeful. And certainly they've been, the hub that's been funded has been mandated to work with the downstream planners and planning community in that regard. Infrastructure Australia seems to be becoming more aware around the power and the potential of modelling and simulation to help inform coherent and sensible investment going forward. So I think there are glimmers of hope. I don't underestimate how difficult it's going to be. And again, one of the things which I am very keen to see Oren do is really start to bring these disparate groups together and actually start to have that conversation around how do we work together. And I think we will see more of this. As many of us are aware, there is again a national move towards research commercialization. Whether rightly or wrongly, that will I think force us to be, as academics, to be thinking far more around what are the pathways to impact and translation going forward. We may see the development of schemes similar to the UK, such as the Industrial Challenges Fund, which reverses and switches how funding is distributed. and puts some of the money in the hands of industry, and then they come to the academics to work out how to actually do the research. So I think there's opportunities, but there's a lot of really hard work that needs to be done on all sides to bring the potential to fruition. And one of the reasons I moved to Australia, one of the reasons I took the job at Oran, is I genuinely believe that now we're at a junction with urban and regional data science that we can genuinely achieve that we can build those links, and we can drive an evidence-based policy and planning practice forward in Australia.
Great. I'm glad to hear your enthusiasm and your positivity. I think maybe I could do with a bit of that as well. So very glad to hear it. Yeah, good. We wish you all the best of luck anyway.
So just to conclude, thanks, Stuart. Like, one comment I just want to pick up from the chat we have from one of our government attendees, Prudence Lawrence, who said, great presentation, Stuart, very informative. Digital twins that look at resilience and responsiveness are very important for Australia, looking to manage its present and future challenges with climate change events. So thanks, Prudence, for that comment. And thanks, Stuart, for an excellent presentation. So that has been recorded with your permission, and will be available for those who want to digest further what you presented. And just finally, our next presentation we have in a fortnight is our very own Deputy Director, Scientia Associate Professor Hazel Easthope, who will be presenting on Apartments Aren't Forever, Governance, Redevelopment and Implications for the City. So wishing you all a very enjoyable weekend. For those who are not locked down, enjoy being able to go out and about, and for those who are locked down, let's be resilient and move forward. Have a good weekend, everyone. Thanks again, Stuart. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.